Conference Committee report on House files.
Conference Committee report on House File number 303, an act relating to state government appropriating money for outdoor heritage fund, clean water, etc. The Conference Committee report is addressed to the Honorable Kurt L. Doudt, Speaker of the House, the Honorable Sandra L. Pappas, President of the Senate. We, the undersigned conferees for House File number 303, report that we have agreed upon the items in dispute and recommend as follows. And the Conference Committee report is signed by all 5 conferees on the part of the House and all 5 conferees on the part of the Senate. Urdahl moved that the report of the Conference Committee on House File number 303 be adopted and that the bill be repassed as amended by the Conference Committee.
Members, please take your conversations to the alcove or to the retiring room. The gentleman from Meeker, Chairman Urdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. It's time for the cherry on top of the legislative sundae. Now, I've been waiting for this so long that Johnny's graduated from high school. I'd just like to say a few things because these questions have been out there. I just want to make assurances of this before I begin my very actually short remarks. There are no shifts in this bill. It's completely shiftless. Yep. There are many opportunities in this bill. Please don't miss them. There is no gas tax in this bill. There are no new taxes. There are no gimmicks. There are compromises. No, I said no shifts. And there is no Senate office building. None of these things are even mentioned in this bill. What is in the bill is $540,261,000 in legacy money. This bill helps people all over Minnesota. Funds go to every district that any of you represent. In some way, all districts in this state are impacted by legacy funding. It's something that the people of Minnesota expect us to do and do it as judiciously as possible. And let's get through this as quickly as we can before the wheels fall off the wagon.
Discussion. The gentleman from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And would Representative Urdahl yield for a couple of questions?
He will yield. The gentleman from Dakota.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Urdahl, I'm looking on page 55, and this is a Clean Water Fund appropriation. And when the bill was in front of the House before, we heard that we needed to make sure we were following the Clean Water Council recommendations. And somewhere, somehow, last night or the night before or somewhere in the middle of the night, all of a sudden there's $11 million a year appropriation for payments to soil and water districts. Representative Urdahl, do you have that component there?
The gentleman from Meeker, Representative Urdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Hansen, you referring to lines 55.4 to 55.24?
Mr. Speaker, yes, that's the section I'm asking about.
Gentleman from Meeker, Chair Urdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Hansen, while I was not directly involved in the negotiations on this, Representative Torkelson was, but and he can correct me if there's any mistake here. This is the funding mechanism for the buffer legislation that was passed earlier today.
The gentleman from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I know elsewhere there were recommendations when we first passed this for buffers, but this appears to be just, it says payments to soil and water conservation districts for purposes of 103C for each soil and water district will receive an increase in its base funding of $100,000 a year. So the Ramsey Soil and Water District would get $100,000 a year. The Lake of the Woods County Soil and Water District would get that. Dakota County, who's already done some of the buffers. But Mr. Speaker, my question to Representative Urdahl, and I'm having a hard time hearing, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If people could pull out their pesky Constitution that's in our desks and look on page 21 under the Outdoor Heritage, Clean Water, Parks and Trails, and Arts and Cultural Sales Tax dedicated funds, it says 33% of the receipts shall be deposited in the Clean Water Fund and may be spent only to protect, enhance, and restore water quality in lakes, rivers, and streams, and to protect groundwater from degradation, and at least 5% of the Clean Water Fund must be spent only to protect drinking water sources. So how does this appropriation, which looks like it's replacing what used to be called general service grants for general administration, paper clips, pencils, paper, for the soil and water districts, how does this $11 million a year appropriation meet the requirements of the Constitution?
Gentleman from Meeker, Representative Urdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Hansen. This was a language negotiated between the Senate and the House and the Governor, and I think that when you talk about enhancing, restoring, that certainly is what buffers do, and this is the money that helps buffers to be established to enhance and protect and restore our water systems.
Gentleman from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Urdahl. It would be if it was, I mean, I don't see in this area where it even says the word buffer. And I think it actually came from an appropriation that was going to the Board of Water and Soil Resources, where there were grants to districts for competitive soil and water practices, which are demonstrated for having a water quality benefit. So it has an increase in base funding, but I don't see where this is going to actual buffer practices. Maybe I don't see it. Mr. Speaker and Representative Urdahl, if you could show me where this is actually going to buffers rather than going to general administration.
He will yield. The gentleman from Meeker, Representative Urdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Hansen, I think if you look at line 55.22, the second-year appropriation cancels if new buffer requirements are not enacted in 2015. So there is a reference to buffer and the expenditures at the conclusion of that section.
Gentleman from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, that's talking about how the money would cancel if the new requirements aren't enacted, and I guess we don't know if they're going to be enacted. The Senate passed the bill that passed here barely with one vote. The Environment and Ag Finance only passed with one vote, 35 votes over in the Senate. So I'm not sure what this would do if the first 11 million goes, and let's say that the buffer bill doesn't go into it just is providing money for administration. How does it meet the constitutional requirement?
Gentleman from Meeker, Representative Urdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Hansen, and I certainly share your concerns that this money is used as it is intended, and perhaps more assurance can be offered you by Representative Torkelson, so I would yield to him.
Representative Hansen, would you like Representative Torkelson to yield?
Yes, sir. I could ask Representative Torkelson directly, I suppose.
That'd be fine. Well, no, let's go. The gentleman from Brown, Chairman Torkelson, to the Hansen question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Torkelson, how does that 11 million a year in clean water funds, how does that meet the constitutional requirements?
The gentleman from Brown, Chairman Torkelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members, and Representative Hansen. The work of the SWCD certainly is completely all about water quality, and this initiative, of course, is centered around the buffer initiative of the governors, which is all about water quality. This is money that the SWCDs would not have if it wasn't for these extra funds, like what we like to call the icing on the cake, that they wouldn't have gotten without this appropriation in the Clean Water Fund. and it will do the work as described in the Constitution.
Gentleman from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And would Representative Torkelson yield again?
He will. The gentleman from Dakota.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Torkelson, when we last debated this bill, the original bill, you mentioned a lot about following the Clean Water Council's recommendations. Did the Clean Water Council recommend the $11 million a year appropriation for the payments to soil and water conservation districts?
Gentleman from Brown, Chair Torkelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members, and Representative Hansen. No, they did not.
The gentleman from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as I mentioned when we were debating shortly the LCCMR bill, we now have some choices in front of us. We've heard previously, both sides of the aisle over the years, we need to follow the LCCMR recommendations. We need to follow the Clean Water Council recommendations. We need to follow the Outdoor Heritage recommendations. And lo and behold, the legislature changed the Outdoor Heritage Council recommendations, deleting a project. First time ever deleting a project. And gosh, I don't have any letter in front of us signed with a lot of names, Mr. Speaker, saying don't do that. Don't have it. Looking up in the gallery, looking for all the folks who said no, don't change the council's recommendations. Can't hear anything either. Can't hear anybody saying don't change those recommendations. And even within a matter of a few weeks, might have been days, we were told by the author that we can't change the Clean Water Council recommendations, but then in the middle of the night, again, an amendment plopped down $11 million a year, $11 million a year that gets put into the bill in the middle of the night, and this bill gets presented to us again to decide in the last hours of the session, a session that started on January 6th, 2015. January 6th, 2015. I'm not quite sure what to say, because everything's been said on all sides of this issue about these recommendations. So the precedent's been set now, folks, if we pass this. And I think we should well, we got an hour and 15 minutes. We could send this back. We don't have to adopt this. So I guess I'd ask for a roll call, Mr. Speaker, on the adoption.
Roll call. Having requested are the 15 hands, seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Gentleman from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And we don't have to adopt this conference committee report. We could say no to the changes that are in the Clean Water Council recommendations. We could take the words that have been said over and over and over and over again. Don't change the Clean Water Council recommendations. Don't change the Outdoor Heritage Council recommendations. We could go back and correct that. We could go back and change that. So we can make that choice, and if we decide not to, if we vote green on adoption, there it is. Gates are open for the future. Anytime somebody says don't make those changes, it'll ring hollow. And it should ring hollow, because without that consistency, all you have left is hypocrisy. Mr. Speaker, I have a different question on a different section of the clean water portion. We had talked earlier when this bill came forward that we needed $5 million for the Ag Water Quality Certification Program. Representative Urdahl, how much money is in here for the Ag Water Quality Certification Program that the Department of Ag has?
The gentleman will yield. The gentleman from Meeker, Chairman Urdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Hansen, I could look this up, but this time Let's just go right to Representative Torkelson. That was his provision.
Yes. Representative Torkelson to yield? He
Yes.
will yield. The gentleman from Brown, Representative Torkelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, Representative Hansen, there is $2.5 million in the first year, and there's a requirement for the Ag Department to issue a report on the Ag Water Quality Certification Program progress up to that point, with the intention that if they do the proper job of reporting and convince the Clean Water Council and the legislature that they are deserving of another $2.5 million, that could then be appropriated next year.
The gentleman from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
So, Mr. Speaker, and would Representative Torkelson continue to yield?
He will. The gentleman from Dakota.
Mr. Speaker and Representative Torkelson, so generally, I mean, the bill in front of us has 2-year appropriations for everything except outdoor heritage. Is there money left on the bottom line that doesn't go below a 5% floor where you could give $2.5 million next year? Or have you appropriated all the money that has come in?
The gentleman from Brown, Chair Torkelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Hansen, that's a bit of an unknown because there is an $11 million appropriation in here that's contingent upon passage and implementation of the buffer legislation. We are at the 5% limit. However, by this time next year, it's likely, given the recent reports of the economy, that there will be more money in the fund and that we would, if necessary, have those funds available at that time.
The gentleman from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm remembering back to my college days when I think it was in statistics or trying to deal with computer code. They have these if-then statements. If then, if then, if then this. Others might call those gimmicks. But it's not honest budgeting. What was honest was the letter that was distributed out when we had this bill in front of us last time that said that if we didn't appropriate enough money for this, the federal money that was coming in was at risk. The $9 million of federal money was at risk if we didn't provide enough matching money. And I think we've heard testimony tonight that that $9 million will now be at risk. Again, another reason to send it back. Finally, I don't know, is Representative Drazkowski on the floor?
He is. Would you like him to yield?
Yes, I would.
He will yield. The gentleman from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Drazkowski, I'll give you a moment if you're... Mr. Speaker and Representative Drazkowski, earlier in the session when we were talking about the LCCMR bill, you raised concerns about the amount of land acquisition. And I know when this bill left the floor last time, it had strong support. I think that might have been the first time it had your support on an outdoor heritage bill. And in the tax bill, there was, I think there was a provision, or maybe you could help me out here, Mr. Speaker. Representative Drazkowski, was there some like supercharged PILT that was in the tax bill that would cover the PILT liability into the future for the outdoor heritage funds?
The gentleman from Wabasha, Chair Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Hansen, yes, Representative Hansen, I don't know if you call it supercharged PILT, but it would pay from the legacy fund and from the LCCMR funds respectively for the land purchases from those funds, the property tax liability that comes with those purchases. And anyway, it's still in the Don't Stop Believing tax bill, and hopefully if we can find our way past this onerous discussion that seems to be out of touch about a gas tax increase, maybe we can have a tax bill and transportation funding here in Minnesota. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And if Representative Drazkowski would yield for another question.
He will yield. The gentleman from Dakota.
So, Mr. Speaker and Representative Drazkowski, that I guess I'll just call it super PILT instead of supercharged PILT, but that's not in this bill then. It was in the tax bill. That's not going to happen. It's but it's not in the outdoor heritage bill. It's not an appropriation in what we have in front of us. Is that correct?
Gentleman from Wabasha, Chair Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Hansen, to all of my understanding, the answer is no, and the bill still is in the tax bill. The Don't Stop Believin', no gas tax increase, give the $2 billion back to the Minnesotans who earned it. Wonderful tax bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Mr. Speaker and Representative Drazkowski, you're making the speaker smile there. He's smiling. Representative Drazkowski, is there, and maybe, or Mr. Representative Urdahl, is there a study in here for that, or is there another piece on the super PILT?
The chairman will yield. The gentleman from Meeker, Chairman Urdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Hansen. At the inclusion of Representative Kahn, there is a provision in there to seek alternatives to PILT, to have a study to do that, and to see if there are, other ways that the land acquisitions tax liabilities could be funded in the future. Nothing specific, just look to see if there are other ways to do it.
Gentleman from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
And Mr. Speaker and Representative Urdahl, is that being paid for with outdoor heritage funds? Is there an appropriation for that study, or who does the study and who pays for it?
The gentleman will yield. The gentleman from Meeker, Chair Urdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Hansen. You can read that as well as I can right now in terms of what I'm trying to get done here in the next 5 minutes. I would appreciate if you would cite the page to me. I could look it up and interpret for you.
The gentleman from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Representative Urdahl, this wasn't my bill, so I thought I saw when I was paging through the, 103 pages of this bill, that it was in here, but would that be in the outdoor heritage section?
The gentleman from Meeker will yield. The gentleman from Meeker, Chair Urdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will. Representative Hansen, would you please repeat that question for Representative McNamara?
The gentleman from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative McNamara, I'm looking for the PILT study, and I was trying to see if it was in the outdoor heritage section or if it's at the back of the report. Maybe Mr. Speaker, Representative McNamara, since I haven't been on the council for a few months, I'm checking. Was this something that was recommended by the council, the PILT study?
The gentleman from Dakota will yield. Representative McNamara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Hansen, it was a proposal, if I remember right, from Representative Kahn. I think you've already been told that. And it was, I just confirmed with the executive director of Lessard Sams, they can do that and they don't need any money to do it.
John from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative McNamara. So that will come out of the administrative 1% or less administrative costs from the fund. Then is that correct? If Representative McNamara would yield.
The gentleman from Dakota will yield. Chairman McNamara.
Yes.
Gentleman from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, members, these are good questions for the conference report. We've asked for an adoption vote on this. I would encourage folks to vote red. We've got about an hour left. There's still work that could be done. Some of the changes could be made on this, and I would encourage a red vote on adoption if we want to have consistency, not hypocrisy. If we want to have not let federal dollars go out the door, and if we want to make sure that we're being constitutional in how we spend the money. So I'd encourage a red vote.
The lady from Hennepin, Representative Loeffler.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Representative Urdahl, I just would like to have you confirm whether or not this bill before us has the appropriation for restoring, preserving the fine art within the Capitol.
The gentleman from Meeker, Chairman Urdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Loeffler. Yes, it does.
The lady from Hennepin, Representative Loeffler.
And thank you, Mr. Speaker and members, and thank you, Representative Urdahl, and to your committee. You know, this is our last night in this building before it goes through a lot of changes. And one of the things that this building is really known for is the exceptional fine art that's very valuable, that if you've taken our tours, they always highlight. And while we've been doing a lot with the stonework outside, many people didn't realize that one of the canvases affixed to high up in our dome, one of the 12 zodiac signs, actually fell down and ripped. So we don't want to have falling art any more than we want falling stone for our wonderful visitors. And we want to make sure that that is going to last for the next 100 or 150 years, just like the rest of the building. And by doing it now, we're going to save hundreds of thousands of dollars in just scaffolding costs. I had no idea how expensive scaffolding is. I mean, we have a few people who work in the construction trades, and I couldn't believe that we actually saved that much just by keeping it going. If you haven't watched the TPT Almanac, David Gillette series, he shows you actually on, you can look at it online, the scaffolding that goes all the way up to our dome, and we're going to be able to do both the interior work and the painting and the fixing of the plaster. The other thing is that we're going to avoid is the disruption that we've had to endure this year. Because if we put off doing this, once again, we would be putting up the paneling, closing
Excuse
off
me,
the
Representative
hallways.
Loeffler, excuse me. Members. Thank you, Representative Loeffler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And the other thing that I wanted the public to know and members to know, that if we don't do it now while the Capitol is undergoing renovation, we'll be back to blocking off hallways, blocking off stairwells, once again disrupting the public to do it afterwards. And we have prioritized the use of this through the Capitol Preservation Commission's Art Subcommittee, so that the first priority will be our finest art, the most valuable art. It's worth in total over $1 million. And we'll prioritize that first, but we're hoping to get to all the art finishes, the fine art finishes within our Capitol. And while most of it isn't available for us to see right now, today I noticed as I was coming in, if you go through this hallway just by the indexes above those big file cabinets, you're going to see some half moons of historical sites around Minnesota that many people have said they've never even seen, and you're going to see a lot of white plaster from the water damage that has seeped through. And that's the kind of thing that these art restorers are going to be able to renew, match the colors, make it look just like it did in that grand opening 105, 7, 8, I'm not sure the exact number of years before. The other thing that I wanted to let you know about is that the Capitol Preservation Commission does have an arts subcommittee. I have the honor of serving as a co-chair of that with Senator Dave Senjum and retired Justice Paul Anderson. And we're going to be meeting throughout the summer, talking about how we can work with not just the existing art, but potentially places for new art with some of the new public spaces that the renovated Capitol will provide, both in the underground level where we're walking through all those tunnels of plywood, as well as up in the third floor where there's going to be some new gallery space, a Cass Gilbert library, and some other opportunities for people to really have some place where the public can be when they're caught coming to testify at a 2 o'clock hearing, and then it gets delayed, and then they have to hang around here until 5 o'clock or 7 o'clock whenever the committee reconvenes. Our lobbyists are really good at knowing where to be, but the public who comes, we invite them in, sometimes from a long ways away, don't really always feel like there's a place where they can feel welcome. And one of the things I think that the House should be proud of is in the negotiations, they really negotiated for some good public spaces, expanded public spaces in the new Capitol that we're all going to enjoy when it reopens in all of its greatest grandeur in 2017. So if those of you have ideas, we're going to be seeking public input and feedback on the art collection and how to use the new spaces that are going to be available for the public when this is reestablished and reopened. So thank you again, Representative Urdahl, to the committee and to the conference committee members for investing in this, because I think you're going to find it's something that's going to make us proud for the next 100 years after us. It should still last and be valuable and be a source of joy and inspiration for future generations here. And the new art, well, that's another story, but I'm not going to get us distracted onto that. I know I would really irritate Representative Urdahl if we started that discussion now. But our first priority was preserving our existing art and doing it in a way it would be most cost effective and least disruptive to the public. Thank you very much.
With no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the adoption of the conference committee report. Members, please vote. Members, please vote. Clerk will close the roll. Isaacson votes aye. There being 116 ayes and 17 nays, the motion prevails. The clerk will give the bill its third reading as amended by conference.
Third reading, House File Number 303, as amended by conference.
Third reading. Any further discussion? The lady from Hennepin, Representative Khan.
Mr. Speaker and members of the House, first of all, this was a really good committee to serve on in terms of the relationships between the members of the committee, the relationships in the chair. This is, as you've noted, I have signed the conference committee report, and I also intend to vote for the bill. There are some problems with the bill, though, that should be emphasized. Representative Hansen already talked about the problems with the clean water part and the fact that we may be losing a large chunk of federal funds, which I'm sure the people of the state, when they urged us to vote for the legacy bill, did not want us to do things that would cause us to lose federal funds. One of the chief, and I've already spoken about this before, the chief disappointments, and of course this is a certain amount of resentment going back to the treatment I got 2 years ago when it was considered that I messed with the Lessard-Sams Outdoor Heritage Council recommendations, when I did not mess with them at all. I simply added a couple of projects which I thought fit into it. And as members who were here at that time might remember, I got totally trashed. I got a couple of items were the only items, I think, sponsored by a Democrat that the governor vetoed, even though he had promised me in a meeting that he would not veto them. So I was totally surprised to see the one section of the Outdoor Heritage Council's recommendations totally eliminated, which was the a project going to the White Earth tribe for preservation of a set of land. Totally amazed, because there's one member of the legislature who, while he was a member of the council, voted for that provision as a member of the council, supported it, and then totally opposed it and strongly attacked it as a member of the House, which seems pretty strange. I'm not sure I remember doing anything like that in my legislative career. But, you know, I am unhappy about the loss of that project. Of course, as we've said, that bill, that section comes before us next year, and so I hope there'll be a chance for the members of the House to become a little less prejudiced against any project that goes to an Indian tribe, all of whom pay sales taxes, have contributed to the legacy. And for some reason, 2 years ago, we also attacked a project that went to the Fond du Lac tribe. And so now we're attacking this project going to the White Earth tribe. You know, my hope is that we'll be able to rectify this in next year's bill. And so despite my dissatisfaction with that, my unhappiness, I agree with Representative Hansen about the lack of real specificity about what we're going to do with buffers. I think this is a pretty good bill, and I advise members to vote for it.
Gentleman from Beltrami, Representative Purcell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Need to say a few words about what's not in the bill. And Representative Khan made mention talking about the land purchase that the Lessard-Sams committee approved on White Earth Reservation to purchase property to be put into trust for the White Earth Nation, property that would be protected and protect the wild rice watershed. You know, I don't know how much folks that don't have wild rice in their districts may understand or may not understand about the importance of wild rice in the state of Minnesota. And of course, some may know, many may not, that Minnesota has the distinction of the largest wild rice bed in the world. It's called Net Lake, 7,300 acres up on the Net Lake Reservation. And wild rice is part of the migration story for the Anishinaabe, coming from east to west. And if this is some history, I see folks are really interested over there, and thank you, because my constituents will appreciate if you learn a little bit about Ojibwa culture. And so it's part of the migration story, and some of you who may be of other denominations, if you will, perhaps in the big book that's got a B on it called the Bible, you remember the Exodus. So this is not dissimilar. This is part of who they are, part of their religion, if you will. And their religion is very, very committed to the creation. Where we hear about the creation in a lot of ways. We're supposed to respect, be good stewards. This is what this land purchase was about, to be good stewards, and it got taken out of the bill. And very unfortunate that this happened in this way. And I just want to tell you just a little bit about this watershed, because we had to work very hard to restore wild rice in Lower Rice Lake in the wild rice watershed, because as we now are debating about what to do with buffers and pollution that impacts many parts of Minnesota, back in the late 70s, we were debating what to do with the pollution from an egg farm that had decimated the rice, 2,000 acres of wild rice in Lower Rice Lake. What could we do about that? Well, the egg farm isn't there anymore. They came under Minnesota Pollution Control Agency The Citizens Board, remember them, we talked about them earlier, and some folks want to do away with them. The Citizens Board decided that that egg farm and the pollution that it was bringing had to come under some kind of regulation. Of course, this is like prehistory for regulation. Remember, 1972 was the Federal Clean Water Act. We didn't do a whole lot with regulating water quality until 1972 in the United States. So here we are, we're moving forward, and we start the story of Lower Rice Lake, and the restoration starts in Upper Rice Lake, in Lake Minerva. And we come downstream, Highway 92, we're south of Bagley, for those of you who know that part of the world. Bagley, Minnesota on Highway 2. We're south of there about 15 miles. I see some heads shaking. I'm glad you've been there. It's a nice little town. Not my district, but it's a good town anyway. So we come downstream from Lower Rice Lake, and 15 miles or so, we pick up Higher Creek coming off some stock cow farm country. And not much wrong with Higher Creek. It looked pretty good. We get down to where that Nelson Egg Farm is, and you get below Nelson Egg Farm, and by golly, you can smell it. I mean, literally smell the chicken crap in the Wild Rice River. And so what are you going to do about that? They come under regulation. They're eventually go out of business because they decide they don't want to operate in a stewardship manner. So we worked pretty hard, reroute the river that had been routed by the state of Minnesota to go directly into Lower Rice Lake, and it was rerouted to go out through a big wetland. Some of the nutrients are absorbed. Had to clean the silt and sediments out of the 2,000 acres of Rice Lake and get it flushed downstream. And lo and behold, we got 2,000 acres of wild rice restored. Millions of dollars to the White Earth Nation. That wonderful food, some of the best food on the planet for those of you who have had some. Really nutritious. This was part, if you remember, I said earlier about the migration story. Well, the Anishinaabe, the Leech Lake, the Ojibwe came from west to east, and they were supposed to come to where food grows on the water. This is wild rice. So these are the stories that the Ojibwe folks bring to this overall situation. Well, now we've got rice restored in Lower Rice Lake, and we want to keep it that way. So how are we going to protect this? We're going to protect the land around the watershed. Going to purchase land. Lessard Sam's funding is going to be used to do that. It was said earlier, I think Representative Kahn said, Native American Indian people pay taxes. That's a kind of a myth, and some people, no, they don't pay taxes. Yeah, they pay taxes. Talk to my wife, she'll give you an earful on that. She's Leech Lake Ojibwe. So we've got the rice restored, we're going to protect it. So why did this particular provision get pulled out of Lessard Sam? I don't know, except that I remember Representative Green, I don't see him here. Try not to invoke his name too many times, but I know he brought the amendment in committee that took out the wild rice, the purchase of land through Lessard Sands. And this land purchase means more to the White Earth Ojibwe band and their resource management than just the dollars that are expended. And the rationale we heard for why this amendment was brought and the purchase not to be made was because it was going to cost Clearwater County $12,000 of property tax loss on an annual basis. So here we're trading off these 12,000 property tax for what means millions of dollars to the White Earth Nation. So I want to draw this distinction. And my district, which is a few miles, about 80 miles east of the White Earth Reservation. I think I probably have more wild rice in my district than anybody else's district in this chamber. I like the rice. I don't know, anybody over there rice? Raise your hand if you've wild rice before. Glad to see it. Glad to see it. So if you went out on a tough day, when I first riced, I said, man, that's like baling hay. That's what it felt like to me. And I'm mostly a puller, not a knocker. I'm mostly a puller. So you're out there working hard, and you're going to work hard. And back in the day, you know, you could go for 8-9 hours. And now it's more limited. But you might get 2, 3, you know, maybe 400 pounds. Some guys and gals brag about 500 pounds in a day. In Lower Rice Lake, in the last number of years, they're doing 1,000 pounds a day. 2 people. They fill the canoe, they go back out, they fill the canoe, they go back out, they fill the canoe, and they come back in. Unheard of. So we've restored the rice. Now help us protect it. I can only trust that as we come back, that this project will get reconsideration, because it means a great deal to the White Earth Nation and to all the Anishinaabe, because rice is very personal. So thank you, Chair Urdahl. It's a good bill. I'm going to vote for the bill. But what's not in it is very troubling. But I thank you for bringing the bill.
Lady from Hennepin, Representative Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to make a simple thank you to Representative Urdahl for helping put the language in that will help restore and preserve the Dakota and Ojibwe language in the immersion programs, including the Wachoi School in my community. Thank you so much.
Lady from Hennepin, Representative Wagenius.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Torkelson, you're intimately involved with the clean water portion of this bill. We just sent lots of money to the soil and water districts for their administrative costs. I want to talk to you a little bit about drinking water. I tend to think of it as, or at least I think we tend to Representative Torkelson, are you ready?
Is the lady from Hennepin asking the gentleman from Brown to yield?
No, I was asking him if he was ready to listen. He was talking to someone else.
Then he wasn't listening.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Representative Torkelson, we're going to talk about the clean water money and your involvement in the clean water money, and I specifically want to talk about drinking water source protection. In Minnesota, we try to avoid talking about drinking water source protection, and we've done a really good job of it. But now we have a report from the Department of Health about all the communities that are having to put new drinking water systems in to take the nitrogen out of the water. And I would just, obviously there's a big one in Hastings. Representative McNamara is not on the floor. He could tell you about that. There's a big one in Park Rapids. That is costing $3,000 per household. That one's costing $3,000 per household. And the folks who are paying for it didn't cause the problem that they are now having to clean up. So one of the ways we can deal with this is drinking water source protection areas. And the Department of Health has identified 3,500, I can give you the precise number, but that's roughly it, of vulnerable acres in this state, so that they are drinking water protection areas that are particularly vulnerable. So far, the Department of Health and Bowser have protected 1,100 acres. Talk to me about your plan for protecting the rest of those acres and how this bill fits into that, if you would. And I would ask him to yield for that question.
He will yield. The gentleman from Brown, Chairman Torkelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members. Representative Wagenius, if you have the spreadsheet in front of you and look at line 124, surface and drinking water protection and restoration grants, one of the largest appropriations in the entire bill, $20,375 is going into this area of work, and we believe that's a significant amount of money. I would remind you, Representative, that I actually have a duisma on my own farm. I farm around some city wells, and they are well protected.
Lady from Hennepin, Representative Wagenius.
I trust that was a pun rather than their being protected. As I looked at your language and then I looked into the bill, what I saw was only one place, and that's on page 57, line 57.20, money for the Department of Health, $1.9 million each year for drinking water source protection. That's what I was talking about, drinking water source protection. The other money you talked about, as far as I know, can be spent for a multiple of things, but I'm talking about very specific, the acreage around a well that will be protected, and what the plan is, and what the plan the Clean Water Council has for protecting these 353,000 acres that now have been identified by the Department of Health as particularly vulnerable. Perhaps what you are farming around is not particularly vulnerable. I'm talking about wells that are particularly vulnerable, where we have only protected by buying a permanent easement on 1,100 acres. So I'm looking for some specifics of how we're going to address those 350,000 other acres, if you would yield.
He will yield. The gentleman from Brown, Chairman Torkelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have no specific information for you, Representative Wagenius. The Health Department has a seat on the Clean Water Council, advises the council on how to spend their money. They address that through the Budget Outcomes Committee, and I believe that they will pay attention to this as we move forward. If you would like to bring issues to the council, you certainly may.
Representative Wagenius.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Torkelson, you are on the council. I am not on the council. This has been an ongoing problem that the council has ignored. If it hadn't ignored it, we wouldn't be in the position we're in right now. So, going forward, looking at this bill, I'm on page 57, 5720, $1,900,000 in the first year, $1,900,000 in the second year, to the Department of Health for wellhead protection. That amount of money isn't coming close to protecting 350,000 acres. Not close. So we need a plan, and apparently it's not in this bill, and apparently if you're asking me to come to the council that you are on, the council doesn't have a clue. Is that true? I'm asking him to yield.
He will yield. The gentleman from Brown, Representative Torkelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, no, that's not true.
The lady from Hennepin, Representative Wagenius.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Then Representative Torkelson, tell me about the plan of action, and that is asking him to yield.
He will yield. The gentleman from Brown, Chairman Torkelson.
The only plans I'm aware of are in the bill. Representative Wagenius.
Lead from Hennepin, Representative Wagenius.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So we're doing a dance here. We're saying, if I can, and then you can correct me if I'm wrong now. There's a small amount of money in this bill that won't even begin to deal with wellhead protection areas in vulnerable areas of this state, when we know we have a huge and growing problem in cities like Hastings, Park Rapids, $3,000 per household to clean up the nitrogen, not caused by the people who live in Park Rapids. So you're saying, what's in this bill? Here's some money. You have no plan. The Clean Water Council has no plan. And that's why we're in this pickle, isn't it? No planning, no thinking ahead, no outcomes. No outcomes. That's when I read this, the water portion of this, it's based on inputs, not outcomes. Members, this is so troubling. Drinking water is really important. And the Clean Water Council is ignoring it. And Representative Torkelson is trying to do a dance to ignore it here. This is so sad.
Gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Winkler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Urdahl yield to a question?
He will yield. Representative Winkler.
Representative Urdahl, what happened to the portable planetarium? I can't find it in here anywhere. And together with the unsalted seas, I thought those were two of the best reasons to vote for this bill.
Gentleman from Meeker, Representative Urdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think it went to the moon.
Gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Winkler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Urdahl, I didn't quite understand what that was about. The next question was whether I could get legacy funding to preserve my button, to give it all back, historic position that we had from last year. But what did you say about the portable planetarium, if you would yield?
Representative Urdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And in all seriousness, Representative Winkler, we did advocate for the House position, which was to have $250,000 in funding for the mobile planetarium, and the Senate did not see the wisdom of our position and would not adopt it.
Gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Winkler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Urdahl, would you yield for another question?
He will yield. Gentleman from Hennepin.
Representative Urdahl, did you trade the portable planetarium for the $10,000 for the state band?
Gentleman from Meeker, Chairman Urdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Winkler, no, we just dropped the planetarium.
Gentleman from Hennepin.
Well, Mr. Speaker, Representative Urdahl, I was sorry to see that the portable planetarium won't be back around. Actually, it's one of the best parts about the whole Bell Museum experience was that would be able to go around to kids around the state and learn about the stars and the universe and all of that. I'm hoping that the state band performances are almost as good as what that planetarium would have been. And I am one day hoping to visit the unsalted seas, and I was wondering if maybe Representative Drazkowski would be willing to lead a delegation up there. We could all go see that one together. We've got a bill before us, members, in this legacy bill that is probably a reasonable compromise on a lot of these provisions. I know there's a lot of concern about buffers and the way the water quality work is done, but by and large, it seems like this arts and cultural heritage section contains a lot of really good provisions. And I know that Representative Moline is very excited that you're funding, I think, seats, maybe chairs at the auditorium in Hibbing High School. Maybe it's a total renovation. And Representative Urdahl, if you would yield to one last question.
He will yield. Representative Winkler.
Representative Urdahl, can you just describe why the Hibbing Auditorium is more important than the portable planetarium for the kids of Minnesota?
The gentleman from Meeker, Chair Urdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Representative Winkler, in part because Senator Tomassoni thought it was, and also because it is a historic site for many reasons. I believe that it's the school that Bob Dylan attended. It is also the school that Representative Moline attended, and also the auditorium in which Representative Moline was married. And so certainly deserving of legacy funding along those lines. But what we did with Hibbing is do a provision for design, and in frankness, I think that a bonding project, funding for the rest of it would be more appropriate. But basically, that was again a discussion with the Senate and strongly advocated by Senator Tomassoni.
The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Winkler.
Continue.
I just assumed he didn't.
I certainly.
Representative Urdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If we have a planetarium, a mobile planetarium in the future, I think it'd be a very valuable thing for your children to go to, and I'm going to suggest that it park in front of your house so that they can have a quick access to it.
Representative Winkler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Urdahl, I think that would be terrific if you wanted to park your portable planetarium in Golden Valley at my house. I don't know if you can pull it around in the back of a truck or what you're planning to do with it, but as long as it's mobile, I guess it would be able to qualify for legacy funding instead of for bonding projects, because I think if it was bonding, it'd have to be a planetarium that was locked in place somewhere. But members, I think that there are a lot of really good things in this legacy bill. The overall work is pretty sound. I want to thank you, Representative Urdahl, for including the Purpose Center projects in there. As you know, those school arts and technology integration projects are going on all around the state. The Purpose Center is a state asset. It happens to be headquartered in Golden Valley near the future home of the portable planetarium. And but it's headquartered there, but the work that they're doing is all over the state, and that's exactly what arts and cultural heritage money is supposed to go for. It's supposed to allow the outreach and inclusion of kids all around the state in an arts program, especially in an era when arts programming and arts funding in schools is on the decline in a lot of areas. So I think those are very worthwhile places to put this money. And Representative Moline, I'd hope you'd share some more comments. Representative Urdahl, I also want to say it's pretty generous of you to put money in this bill for the Hibbing Auditorium, considering I don't think that Representative Moline invited you to her wedding. I think that shows a generosity of spirit. And members, I think this bill is probably worthy of a yes vote when all is said and done.
The gentleman from Ramsey, Representative Isaacson.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for your indulgence, and I have a question for Representative Urdahl. But first I want to say that one of the things that I've really enjoyed about being a representative in 42B, or 442B, is that we have 7 lakes, and we have a multitude of wetlands and swamps and all kinds of water life and really great trails. And so I'm looking at the outline of your bill here, and I do have 2 questions regarding specifically wetlands and shallow lakes. You may not know this, but in Little Canada, Minnesota, we've had a problem with a lake called Savage Lake. And what Savage Lake is it's a lake that was cut in half by I-35 when it was built. Literally, when the ice was frozen, one year they poured sand down, and when the ice melted, the sand made the foundation for what is now 35E, and the lake has been cut in half. And so to call it a lake is a bit of a stretch. It definitely qualifies as a shallow lake. And so I'm looking at Phase 7, talking about the accelerated shallow lakes and wetland enhancement. And I'm just wondering, when they talk about restoring shallow lakes, that is actually something I'm legitimately going to be writing a bill about in this next year, because we have some current concerns about how that lake is going to be managed for a couple of reasons. One, relating to the runoff of water off of I-35 into the lake is definitely problematic and creates some pollutant issues. But the second thing is what does it mean, in my first question, Representative Urdahl, if you'll yield, what does it mean when it says restore shallow lakes? Because this is a lake that is on both sides, since it's been cut in half by the freeway, literally is half the lake it used to be on each side, and is a shallow lake. It barely can hold some aquatic life, and I know the residents of Little Canada would like to see this lake come back to life again, and I'm hoping to do some work for them on their behalf. But when I saw this, it really caught my eye as something I hope to be looking into, and I'm wondering, is this, when they say restore, what does that mean, sir?
He will yield. The gentleman from Meeker, Chairman Urdahl.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Isaacson. I share your concern because in my county, in fact, very near where I live, I have shallow lakes too. But in terms of the exact definition for what does it mean and how do you enhance a shallow lake, I shall turn and ask you to turn to Representative McNamara.
Representative Isaacson.
Mr. Speaker, would Representative McNamara yield to a question?
He will. Representative Isaacson.
Basically the same question, sir. Just want to understand what it means to restore a shallow lake. Thank you.
Gentleman from Dakota, Representative McNamara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the most important things they could do is control the water that comes into that body of water, and then sometimes they'll do a drawdown. They can create a structure for that. There's what we call a conservation grant program for the metro area, a special program that Representative Khan got placed in law. I would suggest you make an application to that program. It will fit your situation very well.
Representative Isaacson.
Would Representative McNamara continue to yield?
He will yield. Representative Isaacson.
I think there's two parts specifically to my lake that I'm concerned about. One of them has to do with the water as it comes in off the interstate. And when you said the water that goes in and you try to control what water is coming into that area, is that specifically something, or would that be more of a transportation question?
The gentleman from Dakota, Representative McNamara.
Representative Isaacson, it's conditioned on the bill passing and becoming law because there's no money in the grant program now. So if the bill doesn't pass today, then it won't happen and you won't be able to restore that lake.
Representative Isaacson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative McNamara. That indeed would be a tragedy. The second question I have is back to Representative Urdahl, if he will yield for a question.
He will yield. Representative Isaacson.
I'm looking at the down here. It talks about the Conservation Partners Legacy Grant Program, both statewide and metro habitat. I have a specific area that I share with Representative Yaruso that is a very large wetland kind of lake area just south of Snail Lake. And I'm trying to understand when we talk about the kind of money, well, specifically when I look at this, it says the 7 county metro areas and cities with population of 50,000. Is that and, or can it be somewhere in the 7 county metro, or cities over 50,000 can apply for that? That's my first question.
Chair Urdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Isaacson. Once again, for that portion of the bill, you should ask Representative McNamara.
Representative McNamara will yield. Representative Isaacson. Representative McNamara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Isaacson, yes, both are eligible for that program, but only if this bill passes.
Representative Isaacson.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I have to say that I'm very excited about these opportunities. I know that in my district we take our lakes and on our natural habitats very seriously, having several lakes, and I think that looking at what this grant program has to offer and then exploring this wetlands enhancement is going to be an incredible boon for us. So I really hope that my members on my side will take the time to consider a green vote for this bill, and I thank you for your time.
Gentleman from Rice, Representative Bly.
Thank you, Speaker. I was hoping to ask Representative Torkelson a question. I saw him pass by, but I didn't see him come back.
Representative Torkelson is now on the floor. Representative Bly.
Okay. All right. Representative Urdahl, if you would yield for a question.
He will yield. Representative Bly.
I heard some conversation about the Department of Ag's water certification program, and you know, they received a grant for $9 million from the federal government based on the money that they had, and I'm concerned if the money that's that they were going to get from Legacy is cut. Does that affect that $9 million that they're expecting from the federal government? Can you answer that question?
Chairman Urdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Bly, let's just The areas that I am most proficient at in this bill are 3, 4, and 5, those articles. If you have, frankly, it would just be quicker for you, all of you, if your questions deal with Articles 1 or 2, to go directly to Representative McNamara or to Representative Torkelson if he is here.
Representative McNamara will yield. Representative Bly.
Thank you, Speaker. Representative McNamara, did you hear my question? Yeah, okay, thank you.
Representative McNamara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, Representative Bly, that money is conditional on this bill passing, and that money is eligible, and there's enough money in the first year in this bill to use a federal match, and I confirmed that with the Assistant Commissioner yesterday. Again, it's conditional on this bill passing today.
Representative Bly. Okay. Representative Moline.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. And Representative Urdahl, I just wanted to make sure I cleared up some things about the Hibbing High School auditorium provision that's in there. I did happen to graduate from high school there, as did my now husband, and we did happen to get married there, but I can assure you there are many more famous people that have been in that auditorium, Bob Dylan being one of them. At the time, Robert Zimmerman playing on the stage there. JFK has visited the Hibbing High School auditorium. But more importantly, members, Hibbing High School is the only school in Minnesota that's on the National Historic Register that still operates as a school. So whenever they have to do any upgrades or refurbish anything, it costs a great amount of money, of course, because they have to make sure they're within the guidelines of the National Historic Register. And it is definitely a gem in northeastern Minnesota, and we're lucky to have it here in our state. And I would certainly invite all members to visit the auditorium, and I do appreciate the investment that is here in this bill. You know, like I said, a unique circumstance where we're the only functioning school on the National Historic Register. And Representative Urdahl, you might be interested to know that right down the road from Hibbing High School is the Gino Paolucci Planetarium. And so since we no longer have the portable planetarium in the legacy bill, folks can come up to Hibbing and view our auditorium and then go down the road to the Paolucci Planetarium. So thank you, Representative Urdahl, for that provision coming out of conference committee. I appreciate it.
Further discussion? The gentleman from Nicollet, Representative Johnson C.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I have a few comments and questions about the Agriculture Department and the Clean Water Fund. And I understand, Representative McNamara, you're asking. I kind of missed the question that was asked by Representative Bly, and this might be my question, but if Representative McNamara would yield to a question.
He will yield. Representative Johnson C.
You'll probably recall that a couple of weeks ago when the bill was coming through, I'm concerned about the Agriculture Water Quality Certification Program. I heard you reference that there was sufficient money to keep something going. Were you referring in the question or response to Representative Bly about the Ag Waters Quality Certification Program?
Representative McNamara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Johnson, yes, that is the answer to that. You're asking the same question Representative Bly did. And yes, the money that's in this bill, if it passes, will be able to match that $9 million of federal money that will be available to farmers in all our districts if this bill passes. If this bill doesn't pass, that money's lost.
Representative Johnson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And thanks, Representative McNamara. I think that's good work. Whoever did that, assured that. As you know, I was concerned about that. It's just my feeling being that it's important to hang on to that money, and we have a long record in Minnesota of giving more money to the federal government than getting back. I think you also know, folks, that I'm interested about the nitrates in groundwater, and particularly in the sand country up around the Park Rapids area and that region where there's been a lot of potato farming. And I see on line 76 there's a chunk of money, a significant amount of money going to the nitrate and groundwater program. And I'm curious, is there a way to, my question again, would Representative McNamara yield for a question?
He will yield. Representative Johnson.
And Representative McNamara, my question is there a way, when there's grants in a program like that, are they targeted towards any specific geography or any specific ongoing kind of a rising crisis type problem as we're experiencing up in the Sand Country and near Park Rapids?
Representative McNamara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The grants are eligible across the state, and yes, those would be eligible if the bill passes. Representative Johnson.
Representative Johnson.
Yeah, and Mr. Speaker, and thank you, but my question was a little different. I'm wondering if it's, I'm trying to figure out if these grants are ever targeted. Is it, maybe Representative Torkelson could answer, but are they ever targeted? Would Representative McNamara yield to another question?
He will yield. Representative Johnson.
Is there a part of the process, is there a way to target the grants towards an area that's been recognized? As you know, that the DNR did ask for to stop the proceeding with the changing the forest land to potato land, and so it's an area that the state has recognized that's in somewhat of a crisis. Is there a way through the processes of the legacy funds to target towards an area that the state has another agency has recognized to make sure that the nitrates are addressed in that groundwater?
Representative McNamara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Johnson, the competitive grant program would recognize that as an important criteria, and that would be a good thing. If the bill does pass and become law, they would be eligible. If you filibuster and the bill doesn't become law, there's no grant available, Representative Johnson. It's your call.
Representative Johnson.
And thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I would hope that that would be an area where it could be targeted. And then going on to the next page, I'm looking at the...
Mr. Speaker,
For what purpose does the lady rise?
point of personal privilege.
State your point of personal privilege.
Mr. Speaker, or point of inquiry. Mr. Speaker, at this point, how long does it take for the bill to pass?
Well, it wouldn't take too long if we went to a vote, but I have quite a list of people who want to talk to the bill. Representative Murphy?
Maybe they won't want to talk so much.
Well, that hasn't been the case. Gentleman from Nicollet, Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the concerns that I've had about water quality is the lack of coordination, that there's a lot of programs, and at times they seem piecemeal. Members, you've heard me speak about the 7 Mile Creek project along the between St. Peter and between North Mankato and St. Peter. And in that project, they've been able to coordinate working with farmers and in the watershed, using grants like these to make sure that they can improve the water quality. The key to the success of that project has been that they have a coordinator who works with the farmers, brings people together at the table site to make sure that they're working with their neighbors to identify goals, to improve the water, and to move on from there. And there's grants for watersheds with multi-year plans. There's surface and drinking water protection restoration grants, targeted wellhead drinking water protection, community partners clean water program, water management transition associated with the One Watershed, One Plan. All of those may have the potential to help support the direct efforts of that sort of a project. My question is, my concern is that at times we have a multiple layered effect of multiple programs that keep us from doing that coordination. And I think going forward, I would hope that we take a look at some legislation that will provide the coordination to make sure that that coordination can be available so that the folks can do their work not only in the 7 Mile Creek watershed, but in multiple watersheds that are impaired and need that sort of work. So that's the challenge I think we have moving forward. I think the projects in this bill are very, very appropriate, very valuable, and I'm glad to support the bill. I recommend a yes vote.
Johnson.
Mr. Speaker?
Representative Thiessen.
Mr. Speaker, I would suggest that we vote no on this bill.
The clerk will take the roll on the bill. The clerk will close the roll. Okay. Yaruso changes from nay to aye. There being 123 ayes and 11 nays, the bill is repassed as amended by conference and its title agreed to.